king, long live the king, long live the king, long live the king.
Donald Trump won the Electoral College vote today, ensuring he will become the next president.
This is fucked up. Yeah, this is fucked up. This is fucked up. Yeah, this is fucked up.
Smiling but candid about the forces he saw conspiring against his wife.
I watched her battle through that bogus email deal. She fought through everything, and she prevailed against it all. But you know, then at the end we had the Russians and the FBI deal, but she couldn't prevail against that. But she did everything else, and still won by 2.8 million votes.
I never appreciated it until now, how genius it was, what they had in mind.
Trump's top advisors are still tearing into the notion that Russian hackers tipped the balance in the election.
The entire nonsense about the electors trying to use the Russian hacking issue to change the election results is really unfortunate. I think that actually undermines our democracy more than any other conversation that we're having.
But even a fellow Republican, Senator John McCain, said Moscow's interference is a troubling sign of the times.
This is the sign of a possible unraveling of the world order that was established after World War II, which has made one of the most peaceful periods in the history of the world.
But this is fucked up.
You know I've got to talk about Trump. Come on. We weren't just going to stop there. Come on. Although I am a little hurt that he's not here tonight. We had so much fun the last time. And it is surprising. You've got a room full of reporters, celebrities, cameras, and he says no. Is this dinner too tacky for the Donald? What could he possibly be doing instead? Is he at home eating a Trump steak? Tweeting out insults to Angela Merkel? What's he doing? The Republican establishment is incredulous that he's their most likely nominee. Incredulous, shocking. They say Donald lacks the foreign policy experience to be president. But in fairness, he has spent years meeting with leaders from around the world. Miss Sweden, Miss Argentina, Miss Azerbaijan. And there's one area where Donald's experience could be invaluable, and that's closing Guantanamo. Because Trump knows a thing or two about running waterfront properties into the ground. All right, that's probably enough. I mean, I've got more material. No. I don't want to spend too much time on the Donald. Following your lead, I want to show some restraint. Because I think we can all agree that from the start, he's gotten the appropriate amount of coverage, befitting the seriousness of his candidacy. I hope you all are proud of yourselves. The guy wanted to give his hotel business a boost, and now we're praying that Cleveland makes it through July.
This is fucked
I have never seen in my lifetime or in modern political history any presidential candidate trying to discredit the elections and the election process before votes have even taken place. It's unprecedented. It happens to be based on no facts. Every expert, regardless of political party, regardless of ideology, conservative or liberal, who has ever examined these issues in a serious way will tell you that instances of significant voter fraud are not to be found, that, keep in mind, elections are run by state and local officials, which means that there are places like Florida, for example, where you've got a Republican governor who's a Republican appointees are going to be running and monitoring a whole bunch of these election sites. The notion that somehow if Mr. Trump loses Florida, it's because of those people that you have to watch out for, that is both irresponsible and, by the way, doesn't really show the kind of leadership and toughness that you'd want out of a president. If you start whining before the game's even over, if whenever things are going badly for you and you lose, you start blaming somebody else, then you don't have what it takes to be in this job. Because there are a lot of times when things don't go our way or my way. That's okay. You fight through it. You work through it. You try to accomplish your goals. But the larger point that I want to emphasize here is that there is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections, in part because they're so decentralized and the numbers of votes involved. There's no evidence that that has happened in the past or that there are instances in which that will happen this time. And so I'd advise Mr. Trump to stop whining and go try to make his case to get votes.
I think he's the worst president maybe in the history of our country. I think he's been a disaster. He's been weak. He's been ineffective. You look at this so-called recovery, it's setting record lows. It's, I guess, not since 1949 has there been anything like it. You look at home ownership. Look at what happened as an example. He talks about Ukraine. I believe I know far more about foreign policy than he knows. Look at Ukraine. He talks about Ukraine. Well, you know how tough he is, right? How tough he is with Russia. In the meantime, they took over Crimea. And I understood that. And most papers covered what I said accurately. Some didn't because the press is so dishonest. But Crimea, I mean, the Russians took it over under Obama's very powerful leadership. And, you know, he talks about me with Russia. Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing, frankly, if we actually got along with Russia and worked out some kind of a deal where we go in and knock the hell out of ISIS along with NATO and along with countries that are in the area? Wouldn't that be wonderful as opposed to fighting? But Crimea was taken over, and you know this better than anybody because you were covering it a couple of years ago. It was taken over during Obama's regime, big, tough president. So, look, I think he's one of the worst presidents, maybe the worst that we've ever had in the history of our country.
I mean, the Muslim thing, not allowing any Muslims into the United States.
On a temporary basis, look at them starting to clap. Wow.
One person was starting. Sorry,
there's one conservative.
Yeah. But you probably knew that was going to get some controversy.
I did. But, you know, there's something happening. And we're talking about on a short-term basis, temporary. But, Jimmy, there's something happening out there. There's hatred. You look at what's going on. Look at Paris and look at look what happened in Los Angeles just recently. And, I mean, look at the World Trade Center. People flying airplanes into the World Trade Center, into the Pentagon. We've got to figure out what's going on. We don't know in this country. We don't know. And we're not getting any help because other people know that these people are about to do something and they never get reported to our police. They never get reported. So we say we have to figure it out, whether it's that or illegal immigration. And I think it's one of the reasons. I mean, we just came out with a poll, 42% of the people, and you know, this was 15, 16 people, 42% of the people are in favor of me.
I mean, some people don't agree with you as
No,
well,
that's
but
true.
but you.
Obama will go down as perhaps the worst president in the history of the United States! Exclamation point at real Donald Trump. Well, at real Donald Trump, at least I will go down as a president.
Robert, what's a major problem in the world today?
It's a word that I learned from you, actually.
Called for a ban on Muslims, and significant segments of the population in America agree.
Intrigued is an interesting way of putting it.
Struck. Well, what was their reaction? That's one of my 5 questions. But the point is,
Ron, let's stick to 2.
The point is, in the past, you've explained that as anger, resentment, insecurity, economic insecurity. And the question is, how much responsibility do you accept for that reservoir of feeling in the country that's propelling that sort of candidate? And a couple of weeks ago, you told Matt Lauer that Donald Trump would not win the presidency. Do you now think that he will not win the nomination as well? And what about Rubio and what about Cruz?
I'll leave it to you to speculate on how this whole race is going to go. I continue to believe Mr. Trump will not be president. And the reason is because I have a lot of faith in the American people. And I think they recognize that being president is a serious job. It's not hosting a talk show or a reality show. It's not promotion. It's not marketing. It's hard. And a lot of people count on us getting it right. And it's not a matter of pandering and doing whatever will get you in the news on a given day. And sometimes it requires you making hard decisions even when people don't like it. And doing things that are unpopular. And standing up for people who are vulnerable but don't have some powerful political constituency. And it requires being able to work with leaders around the world in a way that reflects the importance of the office and gives people confidence that you know the facts and you know their names and you know where they are on a map and you know something about their history and you're not just going to play to the crowd back home because they have their own crowds back home, and you're trying to solve problems. And so, yeah, during primaries, people vent, and they express themselves, and it seems like entertainment, and oftentimes it's reported just like entertainment. But as you get closer, reality has a way of intruding. And these are the folks who I have faith in, because they ultimately are going to say, whoever's standing where I'm standing right now has the nuclear codes with them and can order 21-year-olds into a firefight and have to make sure that the banking system doesn't collapse and is often responsible for not just the United States of America, but 20 other countries that are having big problems or are falling apart and are going to be looking for us to do something. And the American people are pretty sensible. And I think they'll make a sensible choice in the end.
This is fucked up. Yeah, this is fucked
in years.
up.
My hope is that those impulses ultimately win out. But it's a little too early to start making judgments on that.
Your views about qualifications, has that changed after meeting with them?
You know, I think that he successfully mobilized a big chunk of the country to vote for him, and he's going to win. He has won. He's going to be the next president. Regardless of what experience or assumptions he brought to the office, this office has a way of waking you up. And those aspects of his positions or predispositions that don't match up with reality, he will find shaken up pretty quick, because reality has a way of asserting itself. And some of his gifts that obviously allowed him to execute one of the biggest political upsets in history, you know, those are ones that hopefully he will put to good use on behalf of all the American people.
What choice do you think the American people made last week? And is there still a chance for what you called a course correction before Europeans make some of their choices?
I think the American people recognize that the world has shrunk, that it's interconnected, that you're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. The American people recognize that their careers or their kids' careers are going to have to be more dynamic, that they might not be working at a single plant for 30 years, but they might have to change careers. They might have to get more education. They might have to retool or retrain. And I think the American people are game for that. They want to make sure that the rules of the game are fair. And what that means is that if you look at surveys around Americans' attitudes on trade, the majority of the American people still support trade, but they're concerned about whether or not trade is fair and whether we've got the same access to other countries' markets as they have with us. Is there just a race to the bottom when it comes to wages and so forth? Now, I made an argument, thus far unsuccessfully, that the trade deal we had organized, TPP, did exactly that it strengthened workers' rights and environmental rights, leveled the playing field, and as a consequence would be good for American workers and American businesses. But that's a complex argument to make when people remember plants closing and jobs being offshore. So part of what I think this election reflected was people wanting that course correction that you described, and the message around stopping surges of immigration, not creating new trade deals that may be unfair. I think those were themes that played a prominent role in the campaign. As we now shift to governing, my argument is that we do need to make sure that we have an orderly, lawful immigration process, but that if it is orderly and lawful, immigration is good for our economy. It keeps this country young, it keeps it dynamic. We have entrepreneurs and strivers who come here and are willing to take risks, and that's part of the reason why America historically has been successful. It's part of the reason why our economy is stronger and better positioned than most of our other competitors, is because we got a younger population that's more dynamic. When it comes to trade, I think, you know, when you're governing, it'll become increasingly apparent that if you were to just eliminate trade deals with Mexico, for example. Well, you've got a global supply chain. The parts that are allowing auto plants that were about to shut down to now employ double shifts is because they're bringing in some of those parts to assemble out of Mexico.
President, given some of the harsh words you had about Mr. Trump, calling him temperamentally unfit to be commander-in-chief, did anything surprise you about President-elect Trump when you met with him in your office? And also, I want to know, does anything concern you about a Trump presidency?
Well, we had a very cordial conversation, and that didn't surprise me to some degree, because I think that he is obviously a gregarious person. He's somebody who I think likes to mix it up and to have a vigorous debate. And you know, what's clear is that he was able to tap into yes, the anxieties, but also the enthusiasm of his voters in a way that that was impressive. And I said so to him because I think that to the extent that there were a lot of folks who missed Trump phenomenon, I think that connection that he was able to make with his supporters that was impervious to events that might have sunk another candidate, that's powerful. Set hard and fast policy prescriptions than a lot of other presidents might be arriving with. I don't think he is ideological. I think ultimately he's pragmatic in that way, and that can serve him well as long as he's got good people around him and he has a clear sense of direction. Do I have concerns? Absolutely. Of course I've got concerns. You know, he and I differ on a whole bunch of issues. But you know, the federal government and our democracy is not a speedboat. It's an ocean liner, as I discovered when I came into office. It took a lot of really hard work for us to make significant policy changes, even in our first 2 years when we had larger majorities than Mr. Trump will enjoy when he comes into office. And you know, one of the things I advised him to do was to make sure that before he commits to certain courses of action, he's really dug in and thought through how various issues play themselves out. I'll use a obvious example where we have a difference, but it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming year, and that's the Affordable Care Act. So obviously this has been the holy grail for Republicans over the last 6-7 years, was we got to kill Obamacare. Now, that has been taken as an article of faith, that this is terrible, it doesn't work, and we have to undo it. My view is that if they can come up with something better that actually works, and a year or two after they've replaced the Affordable Care Act with their own plan, that 25 million people have health insurance, and it's cheaper and better and running smoothly, I'll be the first one to say, that's great. Congratulations. If, on the other hand, whatever they're proposing results in millions of people losing coverage and results in people who already have health insurance losing protections that were contained in the legislation, then we're going to have a problem. And I think that's not going to be unique to me. I think the American people will respond that way. So I think on a lot of issues, what you're going to see is now comes the hard part. Now is governance. We are going to be able to present to the incoming administration a country that is stronger, a federal government that is working better and more efficiently, a national security apparatus that is both more effective and truer to our values, energy policies that are resulting in not just less pollution, but also more jobs. And I think the president-elect rightly would expect that he's judged on whether we improve from that baseline and on those metrics, or things get worse. And if things get worse, then the American people will figure that out pretty quick. And if things get better, then more power to them. And I'll be the first to congratulate him.
Mr. President, you had talked specifically about his temperament. Do you still have any concern about his temperament?
I think what will happen with the president-elect is there are going to be certain elements of his temperament that will not serve him well unless he recognizes them and corrects them. Because when you're a candidate and you say something that is inaccurate or controversial, it has less impact than it does when you're president of the United States. Everybody around the world's paying attention. Markets move. National security issues require a level of precision in order to make sure that you don't make mistakes. And I think he recognizes that this is different. And so do the American people.
President-elect Trump threatened to unravel the Iran nuclear deal, which your administration worked very hard to achieve. What would your concern if he alters part of it, and what would your advice be, considering that he said he's open to your advice? And on Syria, sir, the Syrian regime now is threatening Aleppo with massive onslaught. You talked passionately a few years back about Benghazi, and you warned against the killing of civilians there. Many people criticize your administration for the shortcoming in the Syria policy. Are you willing to let Aleppo fall under your watch? And how do you react to President-elect Trump's statement that you won't support the Syrian opposition? Thank you.
Iran is a good example of the gap, I think, between some of the rhetoric in this town, not unique to the president-elect, and the reality. I think there was a really robust debate about the merits of the Iran deal before it was completed. And I actually was pretty proud of how our democracy processed that. It was a serious debate. I think people of goodwill were on both sides of the issue. Ultimately, we were able to persuade members of Congress and the public, at least enough of them, to support it. At the time, the main argument against it was Iran wouldn't abide by the deal, that they would cheat. We now have over a year of evidence that they have abided by the agreement. That's not just my opinion. It's not just people in my administration. That's the opinion of Israeli military and intelligence officers who are part of a government that vehemently opposed the deal. So my suspicion is that when the president-elect comes in and he's consulting with his Republican colleagues on the Hill, that they will look at the facts. Because to unravel a deal that's working and preventing Iran from pursuing a nuclear weapon would be hard to explain, particularly if the alternative were to have them freed from any obligations and go ahead and pursue a weapon. And keep in mind, this is not just an international agreement between us and the Iranians. This is between the P5+1, other countries, some of our closest allies. And you know, for us to pull out would then require us to start sanctioning those other countries in Europe or China or Russia that were still abiding by the deal because from their perspective, Iran had done what it was supposed to do. So it becomes more difficult, I think, to undo something that's working than undo something that isn't working. When you're not responsible for it, I think you can call it a terrible deal. When you are responsible for the deal and preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, you're more likely to look at the facts. That is going to be true in other circumstances. But keep in mind that it's not just a matter of what I'm willing to do. You know, one of the things you discover about being president is that there are all these rules and norms and laws, and you got to pay attention to them. And the people who work for you are also subject to those rules and norms. And that's a piece of advice that I gave to the incoming president.
Reaction to this election? Surprise?
Surprise.
Fear?
I mean, it all ties together. Well, fear, you know, here's what I would honestly say. I don't believe we are a fundamentally different country today than we were 2 weeks ago. The same country with all its grace and flaws and volatility and insecurity and strength and resilience exists today as existed 2 weeks ago. The same country that elected Donald Trump, elected Barack Obama. I feel badly for the people for whom this election will mean more uncertainty and insecurity. But I also feel like this fight has never been easy. And the ultimate irony of this election is the cynical strategy of the Republicans, which is our position is government doesn't work. We're going to make sure that it doesn't. But they're not draining the swamp. McConnell and Ryan, those guys are the swamp. And what they decided to do was, I'm going to make sure government doesn't work, and then I'm going to use its lack of working as evidence of it. Donald Trump is a reaction, not just to Democrats, to Republicans. He's not a Republican. He's a repudiation of Republicans, but they will reap the benefit of his victory in all of their cynicism and all of their, I will guarantee you Republicans are going to come to Jesus now about the power of government. One of the things that I think struck me odd about this election, and maybe I just missed it, was nobody asked Donald Trump what makes America great. And that was the part that what are
wants
his...
to make America great again.
Yes.
Nobody said to him, well, what is it that makes America great?
Correct.
What is it you want to do
what is
that we're not doing now?
What are the metrics? Because it seems like, from listening to him, the metrics are that it's a competition. And I think what many would say is what makes us great is America is an anomaly in the world. There are a lot of people, and I think his candidacy has animated that thought that a multi-ethnic democracy, a multicultural democracy, is impossible. And that is what America, by its founding and constitutionally, is. Like every
and
other
it's
state,
becoming more and more,
correct,
year by year.
Correct.
But do you think it's healthy that we have this now, that in fact this battle, this real sense of finding out who we are?
Yes, but I also
and whether we have gone off track in some way.
Absolutely. You know, I would rather have this conversation openly and honestly than in dog whistles. You know, somebody was saying, there might be an anti-Semite that's working in the White House. And I was like, have you listened to the Nixon tapes? Like, forget about advising the president, the president. Like, have you read LBJ? Do you know our history? You know, this is, and we also have to caution ourselves to the complexity of that history. I thought Donald Trump disqualified himself at numerous points. But there is now this idea that anyone who voted for him has to be defined by the worst of his rhetoric. Like, there are guys in my neighborhood that I love, that I respect, that I think have incredible qualities, who are not afraid of Mexicans and not afraid of Muslims and not afraid of blacks. They're afraid of their insurance premiums. In the liberal community, you hate this idea of creating people as a monolith. Don't look at Muslims as a monolith. They are the individuals, and it would be ignorance. But everybody who voted for Trump is a monolith, is a racist. That hypocrisy is also real in our country. And so this is the fight that we wage against ourselves and each other, because America is not natural. Natural is tribal. We're fighting against thousands of years of human behavior and history to create something that no one's ever, that's what's exceptional about America, and that's what's, like, this ain't easy. It's an incredible thing.
There's a bee in my bonnet, hello, hello, a bee in my bonnet, hello. There's a bee in my bonnet, hello, hello, a bee in my bonnet, hello.
That anger, that frustration, that hurt, and turn it against the poor, turn it against people of color, turn it against Muslims. That is demagoguery of the worst kind. And if Trump attempts to do that, I will do everything that I can, along with millions of other people in this country, to say, sorry, that is not what the United States of America is about.
We talked about some of the organizational issues in setting up a White House. We talked about foreign policy. We talked about domestic policy. And as I said last night, my #1 priority in the coming 2 months is to try to facilitate a transition that ensures our president-elect is successful. I have been very encouraged by the, I think, interest in President-elect Trump's wanting to work with my team around many of the issues that this great country faces. And I believe that it is important for all of us, regardless of party and regardless of political preferences, to now come together, work together to deal with the many challenges that we face. And in the meantime, Michelle has had a chance to greet the incoming First Lady, and we had an excellent conversation with her as well, and we want to make sure that they feel welcome as they prepare to make this transition. And most of all, I want to emphasize to you, Mr. President-elect, that we now are going to want to do everything we can to help you succeed, because if you succeed, then the country succeeds. Please.
Well, thank you very much, President Obama. This was a meeting that was going to last for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and we were just going to get to know each other. We had never met each other. I have great respect. The meeting lasted for almost an hour and a half, and it could have, as far as I'm concerned, it could have gone on for a lot longer. We really, we discussed a lot of different situations, some wonderful and some difficulties. I very much look forward to dealing with the President in the future, including counsel. He explained some of the difficulties, some of the high-flying assets, and some of the really great things that have been achieved. So, Mr. President, it was a great honor being with you, and I look forward to being with you many, many more times in the future.
Joke about Donald Trump, but I do think that part of the reason you've seen Michelle passionate in this election is not just because we think Hillary's going to be a great president, but it's also because there is something qualitatively different about the way Trump has operated in the political sphere. Look, I ran against John McCain. I ran against Mitt Romney. If they had won, then I wouldn't worry about the general course of this country.
Song is an ode to an oath. Long live the king. 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 Long live the king.